Guys, just before we get started, if you're loving the podcast, can you please go leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, and please make sure that you subscribe on whatever channel that you listen to us on. It helps us out dramatically.
Managing cash flow is probably one of the hardest things. As you said, you touched on it earlier. So I think just, managing stock, managing cash flow, for us being, product-based business, our products are made all over the world. They get packed all over the world. And our supply chain is quite long, which makes it very challenging. And again, dealing with major retail, they have very sort of specific timings as to when they want things in their warehouses, and trying to meet that and trying to manage cash flow at the same time could be quite difficult. So that's probably been the biggest challenge, I would say. Supply versus cash in and out. Like, it's just a constant battle, especially when you're dealing with such big volumes of product.
Yeah, we'll go then, baby girl, we'll go then. They're about to see us shine, cause we'll go then. They can't ever break us down, cause we'll go then. They're about to see us glow, cause we'll go then. Yeah, we'll go then, baby girl, we'll go then. They're about to see us shine, cause we'll go then. They can't ever break us down, cause we'll go then.
Mia, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I was brought aware of your journey by our mutual friend Braden.
Yes.
So he's talked very highly of you, and then watched from afar for, I reckon, maybe 2.5 years now. And then, obviously when I prepare for these interviews, I go deep into research and I kind of read nearly every article on you. So excited, because I think... to be honest, like, I talk to people, who have startups who potentially maybe they're in, say, year 4 or 3 or 4, but your startup story is you're well and truly into business at the moment. So I think it is a great story, and I'm really excited to chat about it.
I'm very, very pleased to share it with you. We are quite far away from the startup journey, but very, very excited to share.
So I'd love for you to give the audience a bit of an insight into Moxie, and we can definitely dive into the startup story and how it all got started.
So we actually just turned 17. We just had our 17th birthday, which is kind of crazy because, I look back and, it's that, I don't know, you sort of look back and you think time has really flown, as cliched as that sounds. You wake up one day and you're like, oh my gosh, what have I done these past 17 years? I was really young when I started. I was in my early 20s, and Moxie essentially was born out of a personal pain point of mine with the period care category. I was an intern. I was interning at a big multinational. I was studying a marketing degree at the time, and I was working on new product development. I was always this person that didn't really know what I wanted to do. Even right through high school, I don't know, I was just too busy partying and having a great time, I think.
Yeah.
I did a lot better than I thought, actually, in high school. I did quite well, and fell into a marketing degree ultimately because I was sort of more of a creative person. And so, I was interning in the marketing department, working on new products, packaging, development, and discovered the personal pain point of period care rolling around in the bottom of my handbag. And it was literally just this kind of like spur of the moment thought of like, what if these came in something a bit more robust so that they wouldn't break open all the time? Literally an off the cuff idea. And I guess if we really think about it, we have these moments all the time. How many times do we say to ourselves, oh my gosh, that's so annoying? Yeah. We have these moments every day.
Yeah, literally.
Literally. I can almost hear myself saying them about different things. But I had sort of, I had vocalized this to a few friends, and I'd spoken about it with a few friends. And I'd actually, my then boss and I were actually talking about it over lunch one day at Nando's. Little plug for Nando's. We were sitting at lunch one day actually, and we were talking about packaging. Obviously, we were talking about work, and we were talking about packaging innovations and things like that. And period care came up and was talking about this pain point, and we thought, that's a category that is really stagnant and hasn't really had much innovation for a long time, and it's really a category that is a grudge purchase. It's not something that people buy because they love it. It's not like makeup and skincare and beauty and fashion that people really kind of like to indulge in. It's something that people don't really enjoy shopping for. So, just had this sort of off-the-cuff idea to almost, really sort of looked at the beauty category and thought, how can I sort of bring some of those elements into a category that's seen as very clinical and quite daggy and quite unfashionable, and really hasn't really had innovation for a long time. And it really was that, the innovation essentially was really in the packaging initially. The packaging and the messaging. A tampon essentially is a tampon. It's difficult to innovate on a tampon, to be quite honest. They do have to meet very strict standards generally. And so, product is a product. You can innovate in some ways across the category, and at the time, and this is going back, 17 years again, it was really about, obviously the product had to stack up and be at least as good as the competition. It was really about packaging and messaging. And, at the time, a lot of the ads that we were seeing were all about women running on the beach in white pants. It's like, if you've got your period, use this product and you're going to feel, free and easy and breezy. And it was just not reflective of a person's experience with that time of the month. And so, Moxie was born, and it was about making things a bit nicer and obviously not having them roll around in your handbag. And so tampons in tins were born.
I'm really interested in, one of the conversations that I look back on that was still kind of really sticks in my mind is Frank Body and talking to Jess Hatzis about some of the stigmas and kind of, in that industry, especially, if we're looking back 17 years, we're in a completely different spot now and probably still not there, right, in terms of the conversations that, are being had in that space. But I imagine back then, it would have been a totally different situation to now. I'd love to kind of, I guess, get your perspective on that, and because I would imagine that would have been a really deep passion for you once you started the project and trying to, change the perspective and start having some of those conversations and make it something that isn't, that you can talk about and I guess it does come from the messaging. So I'd love to hear about that, and I guess the situation or the kind of, what was it like back then? What were the conversations that were being had? Because I think there's a big lesson there for, you can look at, it's easy to look in hindsight, right? And we can look back and say, yeah, that was there at that point of time. But I think, you obviously seen something there that was, or like you seen a customer that was, underserved, or the communication wasn't right, and there was an opportunity there. So I'd love you to kind of mix all those things together and I guess, keep leading us on the journey that you went on. Yeah,
it was a really interesting time. And I guess the benefit for me as the brand owner and the founder was that I was also the core customer, the core consumer. I was living this. I really felt this pain point, and I was really passionate about it because I was, I was at the receiving end of it. I was seeing these ads on TV. I was receiving this kind of messaging. I was being fed these lines about how I should be experiencing my period and how I should be feeling and the products I should be buying and why I needed them. And I was just feeling completely, underserved and kind of lied to in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I just thought that conversation really needed to change. And it certainly was an evolution, even for Moxie, over the years. And I just wanted to be real about it. I wanted to start having honest conversations, which nobody seemed to be having. And it kind of baffled me as to why. It was, at the time, it was 2006. We claimed to be progressive at the time. And, progress is a journey. It's not a moment in time. It's certainly a journey. And now we do consider ourselves progressive period care because it is a journey. But at the time, as I said, it was very much about, running on the beach in white pants and just completely unrealistic. And so our launch campaign actually, and this is pre-social media, right? So
100%.
Instagram, Facebook, etc. did not exist. This was like classic kind of magazine advertising, TVCs, like this is really going way back.
Wow.
And really quite difficult as a really tiny player, very small fish in a very big pond, I kind of like to say, up against some of the biggest brands in the world who were, not going to take it lying down. This,
of course.
This, little company out of Melbourne comes along and wants to completely change the conversation and change the game. You could say shake it up just a bit. We certainly ruffled some feathers, which was the intention. Mm-hmm. We wanted people to take notice and we wanted the category to change. And I'm proud to say that I think we did achieve that. But so, our launch campaign was, it wasn't rah-rah about the product because it wasn't the mission initially. It was to disrupt and change the combo around periods and to bring more people into the conversation. And so our tagline was, have a beautiful day in hell. And our byline was, when you've just gorged a family block of chocolate, you're in, period hell, that kind of thing. And it was just acknowledging a real experience. And it was also acknowledging that that's not everyone's experience, but that is sometimes some people's experience, and that's okay. Some people's experience is fine and peachy, and others is, really hellacious, and that's okay. And we can talk about it, and let's talk about it. It's not about, wearing, tidy whities and hiding it. It's not about hiding it. And that was the idea with beautifying the packaging as well and making the tins pretty. The idea with, beautifying the tins, and the tins were sort of this retro kind of glam, candy stripe, cute little thing that you could just leave on your desk or you could just, have in your handbag. It didn't matter if it fell out of your handbag because it looked cute. It wasn't something that had to be hidden. It wasn't necessarily about shouting about it either, but it wasn't something that you would hide in your bottom drawer or in a brown paper bag, like you may have done in the 80s or the 90s. It was just about being okay with it. And so we were starting to change the conversation. And I think now finally, after, I think we started to see a shift about 10 years in. I think other brands kind of started to really pick up on that and started to change even the way that they were speaking about periods. We're finally even seeing a shift away from using words like feminine hygiene, which, I have to say that was a progression for Moxie too. We were there once also. We like to talk now about period care. Again, being more inclusive about the way we talk about periods. It's nice to see retailers now removing those stigmas as well and removing the words feminine hygiene. Even just, not using the word hygiene. It kind of implies that there's something icky about it. It's not. It's just a part of life.
Yeah, 100%.
So again, it's progress. It's a journey. It's about continuing, always being better, always listening and learning. But that's kind of how it started, with a very, very disruptive campaign that certainly ruffled some feathers.
Yeah, I'm really interested. So how did you think about it? Because you're a marketer, right? And that's kind of where your origins were at the time. Yep. So I love, again, one of the interesting things for me is, in today's modern age, a lot of marketing does surround content in a sense, but I often think that there's forgotten opportunities that you would have probably, back then been like, these are the major opportunities we have. And obviously the goal at the time was, whenever you're going into a big market and you're going up against big players, you just have to capture that small little corner, right? Yeah. And then start there. So I'd love to, did you manufacture that? Were you going, okay, packaging, we really think that this is a pain point, but it's also a massive opportunity. Clearly it was, tone of voice and kind of the way we're going to speak to the customer. I'd love to hear how your mind thought about it, back then, if you can kind of channel that a little bit, but to kind of go, okay, this is how we've got these big players and we need to get this corner of the market. This is how we're going to do it.
I just feel like, I guess it was all about, I'm trying to put myself back there and think about whether it was really conscious. And I don't mean for this to sound, I don't know, it just kind of came to me because it was so, it's funny because my friends even then would always say like, Moxie was like made for you. Like you made Moxie for you. And I did, like Moxie was made for me and for my friends. Yeah. And ultimately for everyone that needed it, kind of thing, because I really felt like something was missing. I just felt like other brands weren't really talking to people and people's real experience around period care. And so I wonder if it was that conscious, like if there was such a conscious process of, I mean, I certainly did. You're right. The marketer in me absolutely did sit down and write a plan and went, this is the tone of voice and these are the core brand values. And, and that was really important. And I still refer to those values, and those values haven't changed over 17 years. The interpretations of those values have changed, certainly, over time. And how we interpret those values have changed. Like, femininity in 2006 was very different to what femininity means now.
Yeah, 100%.
It was a core value of ours, but how we interpret that is really different in 2022.
Yeah,
so that stuff is certainly all there, but it kind of did just really spill out quite organically. In a way.
The entrepreneur in us always likes to look back and say, yeah, we did this, we did that, but in real time, it's kind of like, idea, try that, try this, and it kind of just
so much trial and error. So much. And look, What
if I reframe this and say, looking back now, what do you think from that marketing perspective potentially really worked and kind of really got the business moving?
I think the fact that it was unique, and it did have a unique personality. I really believe that brands are like people, and they should be unique because people are unique, right? And a person can't be replicated. So again, just to get into some marketing speak, but I do a bit of consulting on the side just because I do love brands and I love immersing myself in brands. And whenever I speak to another brand, I always ask them about their core brand values, and I ask them to define their brand values, and not just, in a single word, but then I ask them to interpret that word and what that word means to their brand, because everything is subjective, right? And personally, I think that you shouldn't be able to overlay your values on any other brand. If you can do that, then you're not unique.
Mm-hmm.
You're not unique enough, and you become what we call a me too. You don't want to be a me too, because then you're just like everyone else in that pond, right? So I think what made Moxie stand out is that it did truly have a unique personality, and it wasn't like anything else in the market. It stood out not only visually, it was really pretty. It was bright. It was sort of quite unapologetically feminine for the time. It was pink and candy striped. At the time, everything was a little more, to be quite sort of gendered about it, it was a bit more masculine. It was still that very 90s vibe where you had to be kind of understated and like very kind of like, power suity type vibes to be taken seriously as a woman. Whereas this was like the Paris Hilton era where we were coming out, Dita Von Teese was huge then. And we were coming out saying, we're super feminine and we're embracing this ultra femininity, and we're not going to apologize for it. We're going to talk about periods openly and we don't care. So no one was doing that.
Yeah.
So that was the disruption. Really,
it was
doing things no one else was doing. It was going places that other people were scared to go.
And that was against the grain in those days,
against
right?
The grain.
So you could almost say it was before you were before your time in a sense, as a brand.
You know what? In hindsight, yes. And I look back now, and I wonder if it was premature in a way. I wonder if it was a couple of years premature. I'm not quite sure the market was quite ready for
But do you think that's a great thing? Because obviously you didn't have the powers of social media back then, but the differentiation that you did have would have been a really great tool that you could have leveraged. And it was driven by care and passion and so on. But, if we look back in hindsight, the entrepreneur says differentiated. That's a big tick in kind of the branding toolkit.
Totally. Yeah. Be different. Don't be a me too.
Yeah.
Don't launch it. If it's going to be the same as everything else, don't launch it. Really, what's your USP? It's either, most things these days can be replicated, really. And there's a lot of products that are replicas of each other. So really, if you're considering launching something, just look at it and go, how can I truly make it different? Why are people going to buy this product? Why are people going to buy my product over the other product? How can I make it truly different that it can't be replicated easily over time? Some people might come to me and say, oh, but my product's going to be the cheapest. And I'm like, yeah, but you're just going to create a price war. When your competitors come and make their product cheaper, because arguably they may have more market power than you, and they can probably, absorb those, cutting their costs and maintaining that, then what are you going to do? What are you hanging your hat on? Like, think about that over time. How can you disrupt and continue to disrupt and remain relevant over time?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like I genuinely have to say I really did enjoy looking back at Moxie's journey. Again, just because I love to analyze and say and put principles and things to journeys and say, oh, that's why that worked, and case studies, and that's just what I live in that stuff. And I think, again, like one of the points that I pointed out in the brief to yourself was like, oh, the packaging, because I think, like you said, like products, yes, there are some points in time where there's a lot of innovation in the actual product itself, so the actual product. But I think one thing that you did really well was around, the things that you can wrap around the product, like the messaging and the packaging. And I think there's a really good lesson there for founders is like, okay, well, how do I gain some differentiation in what I'm doing, or, whatever I'm doing. And often it does come in those kind of things. And
it's all the touch points.
Yeah.
It's not just one thing, right? Like it's all the little bits that make a brand unique.
Yeah, I love the idea of a core product, like you're selling an actual product, but what's the psychological reason people buy it? And I think that's where Moxie really, when I look back and read do all my analysis, I go, wow, like, the core product that you delivered was just amazing.
You're not selling a product really, you're selling a solution.
Yeah.
Really.
That's amazing. So I'd love to go into some of the stories and kind of jump back into this journey. Yeah. So the packaging itself. So we were talking, before we come on air, and some of the innovation that happened around that by not by choice, but by the fact that you needed to
desperation.
Do it. Yeah, I'd love to go into that. Because these are like, for anyone listening, for me, these are the stories that you love to tell in future time, like some of the crazy stuff that you did years ago just to get your business off the ground.
Yeah, you do what you have to do.
I think it talks about the desperation that's actually needed at times.
Yeah, you do what you need to do. So when we first started, I mean, and we knew nothing about anything. Like I was a student, I didn't know anything about running a business. I sometimes, I still question whether I still do some days. So the idea was tampons in tins initially, right? That's how it started. We had a name, we had a style, like we knew we wanted to go down this kind of like retro look. And so thought, okay, well, a retro name, retro kind of vibe sort of lends itself to, tin. Obviously, tin itself is quite retro, the packaging's robust, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, we need a tin prototype. Round is cute, it's a cute size, fits in your handbag, fits in your sports bag, school bag, et cetera. Okay, we need a prototype. Okay, cool. So we went to some prototype companies. You know where this is going.
Yeah.
Prototypes are expensive.
Yeah.
We were broke. So, initially we just put our own money in savings. It was myself and a business partner. So backtrack a tiny bit. So my boss at my interning job became my business partner. And it's funny because he was much older and people just assumed, again, because he was much older and a guy, we can talk about this in a bit, but because he was older and a guy, stereotypes, classic, and I was a young female, they thought that like he was like money rolling it. Like, yeah, you've got this so wrong. We just get along really great and work really great together. And so we thought we'd go out and start a business. And so we did. So we just literally, I think we put like $5,000 in each initially, and we bought a laptop and a foot heater. Yeah, super rustic.
I love that.
And then we had like not much money left because we're like, we spent too much on the laptop. Early days. You do what you need to do. So anyway, we had this idea, wanted to make a product, prototype essentially, before we took it to retail and pitch it around. And we thought, well, what are we going to do? Because we can't really afford actual prototyping. Like that's really expensive. And we need a few of them. We really can't sort of fork out. What are we going to do? So anyway, long story short, we bought some deodorant cans and emptied them out and cut them up and made Moxie tins out of deodorant cans and coloured them in with Posca pens, like Posca textures. It was really bad.
Oh my Lord.
And then we used for the lids, I don't know if anyone remembers the original Moxie tins, but they were like pink candy striped and they had black lids. And so we basically got like eyeshadow. We bought this like, eyeshadow palette that had a round lid, and we took it apart and like coloured the lid in like black paint. And anyway, we made these. homemade tins out of deodorant cans. I did find them. I was going to bring it actually, but it's embarrassing. But we all start somewhere. But you do what you need to do, and that's fine. And we took those to Woolworths and we got ranged. So
that's so crazy. So then the follow up from that is you're going and you're taking this prototype which you've pieced together, and it's real. It's authentic, but it's it's
I don't know.
But so then I guess I'd be interested to hear, going into, say, and Woolworths or and so on, and what were those meetings like, especially with, say,
Wild.
a prototype like that?
In hindsight,
and you would have been raw, so.
Oh, I was so green, and looking back, it's kind of crazy because I think there was something to be said about being really young. And with full respect to my younger self, I was so young and naive, and I just went in. I was just like, yeah, let's just go to Woolies. Yeah, it's fine. We actually ran Coles first because, I'm Melbourne based and they were quite close to where I grew up. So I thought, we'll just go to Coles because they're close. Just so dopey about it. Just ring Coles. And so we called Coles and they were like, yeah, who? Where are you from? Yeah, no. What? Sorry, no. Couldn't even get past the gatekeeper. And so then we called Woolworths, and we just so happened to kind of be sort of in the realm of the timing of their range review. So they have range reviews where they review products at certain times of the year, and you have to match up with those reviews. That's when you can pitch a product. And so they said, yeah, great, the meeting's in February. Do you want to make a meeting with the buyer? And I was like, yeah, sure, great. So we flew up to Sydney with our little rustic prototypes. But we had actually already ordered the stock. That's the huge risk that we took. We ordered a container. We just backed it.
Really?
22-year-old Mia went, let's just do it. It's fine. It's going to be fine. It's fine.
How much do you need that though, right? To get it
in
off
hindsight,
the ground? Yeah.
I wonder if me now, it's funny because I'm looking at a new product now, and literally I was having this discussion with the production team yesterday, and I was like, should we order it? No, let's just wait. Let's just wait. So I wonder if I still think I'm a risk taker, but there was something about just being young and naive and just going, I can see you cringing. For those who are not watching this, Kylie's cringing.
No, because I'm just thinking my own memories are coming back.
A whole container of tampons. Yeah, put it this way, I was going to have tampons for life and some if we did not get ranging.
Yeah.
But, I think you're right. I think there was some, and I'm not saying that I recommend this, but there was obviously something, and there was probably something in my pitch as well when I did sit in front of that buyer that showed him how serious I was and how much I had backed myself. Because I feel like a lot of people do go to these kind of big review meetings, and I can imagine these buyers would, and they do hundreds of these meetings a review. They would see it all. You've got to make it really easy for them. And so I think perhaps going in and saying, here it is. It's really unique. It's nothing that's out there, and it's on the way. This isn't get a feel for it, see what you think, and then by the time I make it, it's 8 months away. It's on the water. It'll be here in 6 weeks. I made it really easy for them, and so I think I kind of made the decision. Just that decision making process. I think for the buyer was a little more seamless.
How much do you think you completely understanding the USP and the messaging and being so passionate about it, but really understanding it and, as I said, the way you positioned the product going into those meetings, because an example is you were going into a meetings with Woolworths. Maybe some people are now trying, and, some people are still going to have those meetings as a startup, but it's also now there's social media and there's that kind of marketing.
You still have them. I still have them. I still have to go in and fight for my space every meeting, Yeah.
How much do you think, understanding, that the product and the brand deeply played a massive role in the success of, say, that meeting or, just getting Moxie, off the ground and especially in those meetings?
I think a massive part. I think there's one thing. I wonder if, and again, I see it because I've done some work with other brands, and I think it's one thing. Sometimes I've gone in as a consultant and I've pitched on behalf of other people, and I feel like the sell is that little bit more difficult. I think it's one thing to go in as a founder. I just think you can't replicate that passion of a founder. As much as it's just,
Do you think
there's just that little, it's that little bit of moxie. That's what moxie means, is to have that like guts, that determination, that courage. It's hard to replicate.
Yeah, I think there's a good point there as to why founders need to really back themselves in, because nobody's going to sell this thing better than you.
There's something in it. There's something, and it's really that, what is it that fueled you? What fueled you to start it beyond just like, I want to make a product and make money? No. What is deep within you that has made you do what you're doing?
It's so true. So I do a little bit of consulting too, and I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and the conversation was around power and money, and this person just had it backwards. They wanted to create purpose and vision so they could have money and power, and I said, it's actually the opposite. Yeah, you got to have purpose and vision, and the byproduct is money and power. And I go, if you're focusing on the money and the power, it's going to run away from you quicker than you can imagine. You got to have purpose and vision first, and something that you really care about. And I think, it's just that kind of conversation just really come to mind when you were talking about it, and the importance of backing yourself in, doing something that you truly care about. That, like for me, when I started this business, it was like, hey, if I do this for the rest of my life and I don't get paid for it, I'm fine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I know that I just love this, and I know I'll put everything into it. And I think that's, there's a really big lesson there in what you're talking about, of like that. No one's going to be able to sell this better than you, but that's also the biggest reason as to why you have to back yourself in. And if you truly care about it, really go for it.
If you don't back yourself, I had this conversation with someone else the other day, who asked me, actually, who said to me, I'm having trouble backing myself. And I said, if you don't back yourself, no one else is going to back you. Because that radiates. People can see that. It's like how they say dogs can smell fear. People can see that. If you're not backing yourself, it's really hard for other people to back you. Like if you don't believe what you're saying, how are other people going to believe it?
So true.
Yeah, it sounds cliched, but
true. And I think like the hard thing for people is like, finding that confidence in themselves. And I think, that's another conversation in itself. But I think what you talked about before, about clearly being able to articulate your brand message, why you started, what your values are, and not rushing that, but really, I'm probably too far down that way in a sense. Like I'm like, I want to sit here all day and just really go into this. But I think that's, that really clearly articulating it and understanding it. And if you're in a team, having those kind of conversations and getting to that point where you're like, yep, it's being said in that way resonates with all of us. And that really makes sense. I think that's really important, because that's, in my opinion, where you get that confidence from.
But then when it comes to actually defining it, get it down, like write it down somewhere, but don't be super verbose about it. Just make it really succinct. Because I feel sometimes when people write, brand, whether it's a brand positioning statement or, tone of voice or whatever it is, they become these really verbose documents, like 30 pages and reams of info. And I'm like, that's confusing. If you're using that as a brief, or if you're using that as a compass, as a reference point, there's so much that's open to interpretation here, right? So just, keep it simple. Like define what these things, every word is important. So if you're defining what a core brand value means to you and you're only going to use 5 words or 10 words or whatever it is, every word counts.
Yeah.
Right. So just, be super succinct about it. Well, that's my tip anyway, that I've learned over time. Keep it tight, and then just, it's then easier. There's less room for interpretation as your team grows, and as you get more stakeholders on board, and, more people start to touch and feel your brand. You want that brand messaging to remain consistent.
Yeah, it's amazing what refining can do.
Yeah.
So like, if it's 6 dot points, how do we turn it into 4, or how do we bring that to 3?
So true. And it's hard to do.
Oh, so hard.
Yeah.
I'd love to go into now. So I think something we actually haven't spoken about on the podcast too much is actually how to get a product to launch. Like how do we actually take an idea and then turn that into, especially when we're talking about product businesses and really pure product businesses, of going, how do we get that to launch? What's the process like? And then we can mix that with, hey, what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned in those early days that you think people that potentially want to launch a product can really learn from?
Oh gosh, how much time have you got? It's a beast. Fail to plan to fail. Put it that way when it comes to product. There's so many moving parts to launching product. Sourcing is probably one of the most difficult things. I think especially, look, in good news now, we have the internet.
Yeah.
We're more connected now than ever, and everything's at our fingertips. And I think if anything, the last couple of years has taught us that we can do pretty much anything remotely, which is amazing. We don't necessarily have to travel to find great products and great suppliers and things like that. So literally the world is at our fingertips. But I would say definitely, map everything out. There's always going to be something that you haven't thought of. Talk to people who have either perhaps done it before you. Bring in help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. That's probably something that I could have done better in hindsight. And a tip I would give to my younger self is don't be afraid to ask for help. As I said, prototyping, gosh, that can be expensive. Don't underestimate costs. So things will always cost more than what you anticipate. So budgeting is also really important. I think the thing sometimes with getting product to market is people will often plan to get to launch, but then they stop there. They don't think about anything beyond launch. They don't think about product beyond launch. They're like, oh, okay, so here's what I need to do to get my first batch of product, but then they don't think about resupply. And they don't think about lead times for resupply and reordering and running rates and things like that. So it's not just, getting a product and launching the first batch.
Yeah,
it's what do I do from then on? And then cash flow comes into play. And so many moving parts.
So I guess, my partner's launching a product-based business at the moment, and so I'm obviously heavily involved in that and invested in it. So it's one of those things that even I'm seeing now in real time, I guess I'm lucky that I've been in business before, so they're kind of the things I am looking at. But definitely something that I could imagine just how hard it is to get a product off the ground, and I think obviously, are we able to dive into, say, some of those things like prototyping and even like because like I would assume that especially for yourself, like it's not like you, as you said, you started with $5,000 each, and it's not like you have unlimited money kind of coming in, and you can just kind of go bang from the very beginning. So like, I'd love to kind of go into that process of like, okay, we needed to, prototype, we needed to source, and then we're launching, and then, what are some of those things you do have to factor in for post-launch, and really dive into that. Because I feel like, again, it's not something we've really talked about on the podcast, but it's the biggest hole that you can fall into.
Totally.
And some of the reason as to potentially why the product might not get off the ground.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, why the product might not get off the ground. And I just want to take a teeny step back a little bit, because again, just going back to the planning phase, and I don't want to harp on about it, but I feel like it's something sometimes that people miss, because people might have a great idea for a product, or they just might be passionate about something in particular. As an example, candles, right? Someone might say, oh, I love making candles. I've been making them in my kitchen. I want to start a candle brand. And I might say, okay, that's fantastic. But there are lots of candles on the market. Who's going to buy your candles? Oh, yeah, I don't know. But they've gone down the track of like, I'm going to have these scents and the jars are going to look like this, and I'm going to get them from here, and this is the packaging, and they've gone so far down the track of design, and they've spent all this money on packaging and graphic designers and websites and all this stuff, but they haven't actually thought about how they're going to sell it, or who they're going to sell it to, or how much it's going to cost them, and then how much they're going to sell it for. So like, think about also the other end of it, of do you have a market? Is there a market for your product? So before you even push the button and start spending any money, think about, is this commercially viable? So that to me would be like step number one, do some proper planning. Before you start pumping money into it, actually think about, if I do go ahead with this product, is there a market? How am I going to sell it? Can I get it sold? And at what point, before I push the button, how much money am I comfortable spending on planning and prep and prototyping, etc.? Because you're probably going to have some sunk costs initially, right?
Definitely going to be some
right.
sunk
There's
costs.
going to be some money in prep, in developing something that you need to show buyers, etc. Because you've got to show them something. A mum deodorant can's probably not going to cut it in today's market. Times have changed.
Yeah.
So you're gonna need to spend some money to get it to a point where you've got something to show people. But then at what point do you go, okay, I need to push the button now? So mapping all of that out, and then there's going to be an element of risk that you also need to get comfortable with potentially, because you might say, well, hang on, if this then that. So say you're going into a major retailer, you might know, and this often happens, and this happens a lot in my category, there's often not enough time between when they make ranging decisions and when they want product on their shelf. Like my supply chain is basically a lot longer than that window. So sometimes I need to make a call in anticipation of potentially getting ranging.
Yeah. And
so, you might say to yourself, I'm going to take a punt and invest and just go for it and hope for the best. So, there might be some scenarios that you might want to model as well. And that might mean sitting down with a great accountant and doing some modeling before you pump money into actual product stuff. So that's the planning side. So then when it comes to product, I think prototyping, look, I think the world has changed. As I said, there's so many people doing this now. And there's some really great businesses around that do this kind of thing at really, cost-effective rates.
Guys, if you're loving this episode, make sure to take a screenshot, give us a tag, or even take a photo if you're watching it. Give us a tag, help spread the love. It helps us out dramatically. Guys, I just want to say a massive shout out to our major sponsors, BizCover. We are getting some amazing guests on right now. We're traveling. We want to continue to travel, and we want to continue to grow the podcast. And the reality is we can't do that without sponsors powering the podcast. And right now we have BizCover on. They're an amazing company and they're powering the podcast, so we want to support them. But more importantly, business insurance. It's something that I had no idea I had to have in the early days. And I'm very lucky that I had someone tell me, you actually need to go get insured, because things like professional indemnity insurance and public liability insurance, you just never know when you're going to need those. And more importantly, it's really costly if something goes wrong, or if you get sued or something of that nature and you don't have insurance, and that's what it protects you from. And you never know, one day it could save your business from going under or putting your business back in a time where you are growing and you are making an impact. So BizCover, the link is in the show notes. They will, the great thing about it is there's no paperwork involved, and you can get insured in less than 10 minutes. So the link is in the show notes, BizCover. Go check them out. Get yourself a good deal. Minimizing those sunk costs, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
One thing you mentioned before,
like there's a lot of really great consultants around too. As I said, you can really pull people in now at minimal cost and get a lot of these things done. You can pull in expertise where you don't have it. Whereas, again, then I think things were really different.
100%.
Yeah, things just weren't as easily accessible, I guess.
It's such a great point, because I feel like it's often in the planning that you win or lose, in a sense. Like, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. So like... And
there's going to be things you miss. And I'm not saying you have to have it all figured out either. That's probably another tip, is sometimes people will think they've got to have all of their ducks in a row, whereas I'm a big believer in just get something out. Because otherwise people just really stew on an idea or on a product and they try and make it perfect. I'm like, just get it out and iterate as you go. Again, it's progress. It's, you're always iterating, always making something better, but just get it out. It's never going to be perfect from the get-go.
Yeah, and it's such a, we're obviously, what you're talking about there, there's a happy medium between both, right? It's not I think back and I reckon you can connect with this a little bit, is and especially in the early days when you're that naive and you're like, okay, yeah, I've got the best product ever, we're just going to do this and boom. But then I remember a mentor of mine saying to me, I had this really great idea, never went forward with it in the end, but he said to me, okay, and we never went forward with it because of COVID, but he goes, all right, well, so, how long until you think you can reach capacity for this, and it was a location based thing. And he goes, okay, now double that in terms of time. Does it still work? Are you in trouble?
Yeah.
And I think for me that was the first time around planning around scenarios, and I was like, wow, okay, I'm not just bull a gate anymore. Like, especially, you know, as you start to leverage, you know, there's more on the line. I think scenario planning
and then think about how comfortable you are with that.
Yeah, and that's another really great point. When you're trying to start a business, there is risk involved, and there are other people in your life that you have to think about when taking those risks and so on, depending on where you are at. And then something I'd love for you to talk about is, which I don't think, again, we haven't really talked about it too much, but I know personally how important it is like actually mapping out your cash flow based on those scenarios and understanding margins for your product. Like margins for me is the biggest one, that it will tear you down quicker than, you know, anything else. I'd love for you to talk about that and maybe some of the lessons that you learned. You might have some stories there as well.
So many. Margin, secret killer.
Literally.
Yeah. In hindsight, I would have built in more margin for myself from the get-go, because again, there's always these little hidden costs. There's always things that you don't think about. And even just considering things like currency fluctuations. People really forget about currency fluctuations, and they don't factor that in to their margin calculations. So again, even now when I'm modeling a new product, I will model it like 3 different ways, maybe more, and I account for different currency fluctuations. And I'm like, well, what if this happens to the US dollar? We buy a lot in USD. So it's like, what if this happens to the US dollar versus the Aussie? How does that look? Because if you are selling a product into retail, into a major retailer, it's really, really difficult to implement a price rise at the retail level. There are a lot of hurdles you have to jump through. So you want to build enough beef into your product that you can essentially, you know, survive if something happens. Like we went through the GFC.
Yeah, wow.
That was fun times, not at all. That was horrendous. So that was really tough. That really hurt us. We were dealing a lot with overseas as well. We were exporting a lot. That was a really tough time. We hadn't built that into our margins. We dealt with a distributor that went bust during that as well. So you kind of really want to factor that into your calcs and make sure that you've got enough to play with, enough room to play with, so that you're not so close to the wind. And or you might have some products that are, again, depending on what your range looks like, and if you do have a broader range, you might say, okay, well, that's kind of my lowest seller, my loss leader, but it's important in the range. I make up that margin on this product, which is like, you know, triple that margin, and swings and roundabouts kind of thing.
Yeah.
But don't ignore your margin. Don't go slim. Yeah,
because there's a massive relationship between, you know, like your gross margins and scalability, isn't there, as you start to try to expand. You know, so because, I mean, I'd love for you to, I don't know if there's like rules of thumb, but I really love what you just said then around understanding that some products can be really high margin, some aren't, but they doesn't mean that you shouldn't be stocking them or you shouldn't be putting them in, because there's a dynamic there that kind of needs to be understood.
Yeah, it depends how they fit into your range and how you're selling them. So you might have a product that's really high margin that you don't sell much of, but the margin's so great that, again, it has a place within your range. You might have a product that's quite low margin, and, you know, what does low margin mean? Again, that's kind of subjective, right? That's going to be different for every business. You might have a product that's on the lower side, but you sell a ton in volume, and it's a volume play. So it just depends. Again, it depends on your business model. It depends, you know, what your goals are.
Is there any guiding principles you have around that? Because obviously it is subjective, but is there any guiding principles you have around that for startups? You know, like around, you know, product and obviously launching new products and so on. Is there, like, as I said, I know it's difficult to answer that, but is there any guiding principles?
Look, I really believe every business is so different. So I wouldn't say there's no one size fits all. If anything, I would just say don't rely on it. So I wouldn't say, you know, have a slim margin and just assume you're going to do large volume, because you might not. Like, what if you don't? So again, model it out and have what I call a plan Z. Like, what's your plan Z? So if that plan doesn't work, what are you going to do? Like, what's the plan?
Yeah.
If you have a plan in place, then cool, go for it. But what if you're relying on, okay, I can wear a low margin if I'm going to sell X volume. What if you don't sell X volume and you're running at X margin? Is that a sustainable business? And the answer might be no. Then what?
Talks to the need of having a really great accountant, doesn't it?
Oh, you want to really... That was my first hire.
Yeah.
Good accountant.
And you know, like having a really good one, someone who's really proactive in your corner.
Someone strategic.
Yeah.
Ideally. I mean, there's different types of accountants, obviously, that perform different functions. And in a perfect world, you would have different ones to do different things. But someone like a strategic sort of accountant that can do some modelling for you like this and help with these kinds of scenarios and help with margin calculations, particularly if accounting isn't your forte, that is so beneficial for a startup. I would say absolutely. If you're doing, you know, product-based business, definitely get someone to help you with this kind of thing.
Yeah, such a good point.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a good point.
Yeah.
And it's a necessity. It's an absolute necessity, especially as you grow. I would love to now dive into what were some of the biggest challenges as you really started to expand. So, you know, obviously there's the challenges that come with being a startup and you were able to conquer those. But once you started to really expand and you know, grow as a company, it's a new set of challenges. And what were some of those for you, and what were some of your biggest lessons during those times?
Oh gosh, I think there were so many on different levels. There were internal challenges just in terms of running a business and, you know, managing a team and the dynamics of that and you know, growth of the business internally, and then external forces, you know, the market changing and new products coming into the market, new brands, the retail landscape changing, the GFC hitting, COVID, just all kinds of things that just, you know, I guess we're essentially sort of a mature brand now. So we've seen a lot of different iterations of how business has, like the rise of e-com.
Yeah, I was going to ask because that was actually something that popped into my mind before maybe about half an hour before we started. I was like, e-com.
Yeah.
You would have seen the evolution and have had to experience that. And you know, obviously make some shifts in your business a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, so maybe what were some of the internal challenges that you faced, you know, that as you started to expand around, say, team or, because I think there's an interesting relationship between the challenges that were brought to you externally that would have given you internal challenges and then vice versa, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And they do sort of come, you know, together, right? They influence each other.
Yeah.
Bit of a symbiotic relationship. I think managing cash flow is probably one of the hardest things. As you said, you touched on it earlier. So I think just, you know, managing stock, managing cash flow for us being, you know, product-based business, our products are made all over the world. They get packed all over the world. And our supply chain is quite long, which makes it very challenging. And again, dealing with major retail, they have very sort of specific timings as to when they want things in their warehouses and you know, those timings are quite strict. So that puts a lot of pressure on our supply model ultimately. So trying to meet that and trying to manage cash flow at the same time can be quite difficult. So that's probably been the biggest challenge, I would say, is just, supply versus cash in and out. Like it's just a constant battle, especially when you're dealing with such big volumes of product.
That was what I was going to ask.
And really high minimum quantity orders, you know, really high MOQs.
Would you say that that's psychological, you know, or is it, you know, there's obviously a psychological element of like dealing with bigger volumes, more money in and out, you know, how did you guys manage that? You know, is it something that, you know, you kind of had to comprehend in real time of like, hey, we're dealing with this now, or does that bring the anxiety in, or is it more just like, wow, we actually have to, you know, there's capacity, there's, you know, obviously warehousing and different things like that.
I think it's functional. It's functional.
Definitely
and just
functional.
Really just having to have all your ducks in a row, and really having like, you know, operations, finance, like having everyone. I kind of like to think of it as like people in the right seats on the bus. So everyone on the bus, so all your team playing together. So everyone's in the right seats on the bus, like basically performing their roles at their best. like everyone has to work together for everything to work. Like everything is like so like, you know, finely tuned, and you know what I mean? It's like literally you're talking like days, and every minute counts.
Yeah.
You know?
One thing I really love to do is have like a rolling org chart that actually connects to future cash flows. And
Oh, what do you mean?
so like, you know, I always think about my business of like what do we want to achieve in the next 6 to 12 months, and then beyond that as well.
Yeah.
And then really what I boil it down to is like team, right? So you kind of mentioned it before, is like having people, you know, on the right seat, you know, and so on. It's kind of like that. It's like, okay, where do we perceive that our next constraint is going to be into the future based on where we are as a company? So I have an org chart, and then I'm factoring that org chart into my cash flow over the next 12 months.
Oh, that's interesting.
To kind of
take this offline. I'll be interested to know more.
Yeah,
about that.
yeah. But I think you're right in the kind of idea of like getting people in the right positions, and I imagine for yourself, and you can confirm this, is like, you know, when you're saying that, you're meaning, okay, we're expanding, and you're talking about the different functions of the business, marketing, operations.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously more personalized to your business, but obviously that was something that you've had to factor in when you're expanding.
Yeah, like everyone has to know their role, everyone has to know where they fit in, and everyone has to be basically like performing their role, like, you know, for everything to a T, for everything to work, because those timings are so tight. And if, you know, something's out, and it could be little things, like even if, you know, if a shipment's late, it just kind of throws that whole chain out. It's really tough. But, you know, there's some great tools as well we've used. Like there's some great like trade financing tools and things like that. You know, invoicing finance, like all sorts of different things that you can get with banks and stuff, where you can essentially get like a portion of, you know, your invoicing payments and stuff paid up front, so that can alleviate some of the pressure off your cash flow before you have to pay your suppliers and... before you get paid from your retailers, so you can pay your suppliers, etc. That helps, you know, shorten that window a little bit. Yeah. So 100%. There's also like little tricky things like that. But again, good accountant.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
So how did the structure of the company change then? So and maybe we can look at it more macro orientated. So was there functions of the business that demanded? Was there a time? If we were to timeline that, so, you know, if you're looking back at your company, was it marketing was demanded earlier, or was it operations there was more demand there earlier? Like, I'd love to kind of understand how the structure of the company changed as it started to, through the evolution.
Yeah, I'd say operations came sort of pretty hard and fast. It sort of helped because I was a marketing background, and so a lot of that just kind of happened again quite organically because I just sort of did it, you know, day to day anyway. And again, being a startup, you do just take on stuff, and that's okay. I mean, I still do stuff. Like, I don't necessarily have roles in-house for every single part of the business. And again, as time's gone on, we outsource a lot because, again, you can engage in some incredible expertise that you couldn't necessarily afford to have in-house full time. And, you know, we engage a lot of consultants instead. But operations is the one really, because we grew so quickly and we went into major retail so quickly. So, you know, we got Woolworths was our first major retailer, and we went national like immediately. So it was, you know, like nearly 1,000 stores just off the bat. And then a few months later it was Coles, and then it was Priceline, and then it was Chemist Warehouse, and that was rapid. And then after a couple of years we started exporting, and it was quick, and we're like, oh my gosh, there's so much stock and there's so many products now, and there's, you know, there's just so many moving parts. And so accounting was first because I'm rubbish at numbers. So that was the first hire. I need help. Somebody, I'm sinking. So accounting was first. But then operations, you know, very quickly started to ops department started to take shape because that needed attention. That's just like a constant. Yeah. So if you were to explain operations in a really basic term or kind of just at the base level so someone can understand that? Yeah, and I know this means different things to different businesses, but in ours it's essentially anything to do with getting the product from, you know, manufacture to the end consumer.
Yeah.
That's how we define it.
Yeah.
I know that some businesses define that as being sort of like an HR role, but we define it as product-based. So production, supply, freight, distribution, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you could imagine, I mean, it's really obvious to kind of, when you talk about what you just talked about of the I guess your journey with Moxie and you know how demanding that would have been on the operational side really quickly.
Yeah, like, and it was just like, you know, almost immediate, like a switch, you know, to go from like no stores to 1,000 stores to like 2,500 stores, and, you know, dealing with various warehouses. So as in having to supply various warehouses with different requirements, and everyone's got different requirements, and ordering systems. And so suddenly you're implementing and facilitating different retailers' way of doing business and ordering and things like that. And you have to kind of just make it work. You make it work.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's probably the one. Even still today, I'd say probably that's the biggest part of the business.
I could imagine, you know,
functionally, when
when it's product orientated, that's always going to be the
when it's like high volume, like FMCG type stuff. I mean, I say that only because I'm not so familiar with like other product based businesses, but yeah, for us that's really where the grunt work is. Yeah. And
so the other side of this is you personally and the growth that you must have experienced along that journey. You know, as you said, you're a student when it started, and obviously, you know, quite young at the time, and obviously it would have got pretty serious pretty quickly.
Yeah.
What kind of experience, what kind of growth did you experience, you know, in the early days? Like, you know, is there characteristics that you were like, wow, I really have to grow up pretty quick here, or, you know, were you allowed to, you know, did the role demand that of you, and so on, or, you know, were you allowed to kind of be young and creative and open, you know, and how did that change as time went on?
Great question. And I think I've finally now, reflecting back, have some clarity on this, because I think I was just so in it, and I was like so in my own head for such a long time. But now, so many years on, I can finally look back and just go, oh my gosh, like, what a time. I think there were certainly times when, again, depending on the environment and who I was around, and again, being in period care, and it was, again, at the time, it was a very kind of like femme category. And so some people wanted to talk to me, because being the founder, being the business owner, I was a young woman. In certain circles that played well, right? So talking to, you know, women's mags at women's events, that played well. There was a place for me there. In certain other scenarios, in some business meetings that were very male dominated, in some buying meetings, I wasn't taken seriously at all. No one wanted to talk to me. They would often speak to my business partner, even though I was the decision maker in a lot of instances. So yeah, there were some times where it was like, oh my gosh, this is great. I'm living my dream. I was loving life. And then other times where I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't how it was meant to be. And I got my first real taste of like that, you know, glass ceiling type vibes, you know, inequality. Here we go. Right. This is what it's like. And I learnt resilience then. That's when I got my first taste of like, I got to grow some thick skin. And I did. And then, you know, obviously there's just the regular blows in business when just you try stuff and things don't go your way, and, you know, it happens. And there's been a lot over the time. Things were serious pretty fast. I mean, I was sort of 21 when, you know, the thought for Moxie came, and then 22 by the time we launched, and, you know, my friends were graduating and everyone was going to white parties in Bali, and, you know, I didn't do that. And ultimately it was by choice, really. I mean, I'm sure I could have done that, but all my savings went into Moxie, and I was busy doing this and decided not to do those things. And, you know, I pretty much worked from the minute I could, like from, I think, 14 and 9 months I worked at a bakery, and just, you know, I don't know, I'm very like, have to keep my hands busy, always have to kind of be busy. And so even when this started, I was just like, just working all the time. And so if I sort of think back, I'm like, I wish I didn't take myself so seriously. So early on, like, just relax, oh my God.
Because, do you think it's, like, cause
so I think maybe I grew up too fast, I don't know.
Yeah, so I think about this as well, right? And I think about, in real time is like, I don't think I would change the fact that I'm working so much, but I think I would change the fact that I do take myself very seriously at times, and sometimes that can steal the joy from the actual process.
Good point. It's that. Good point.
Yeah, I think about that all the time.
Like, I've done some insane stuff, like some crazy things where I have taken that moment and have gone, oh my gosh, how did I get here? This is wild. But not enough of those.
Yeah.
Not enough.
And you know what? There's a good lesson here for business owners, I think, where it's like, I often try to tell myself to plan times where I can have those moments, because it's only when you stop and reflect can you have those moments. And if you don't stop and reflect, they can be what's the saying? Too and too far in between. Is that it? I don't know if that's it. But the idea of like it, if you're not planning those moments in, it can often just swallow you, and you may not get to have those, because those moments are not only important. I feel they're very important for the future as well. Because I find in those moments you can find that love and joy again, and not that you never had it, but you can recognize it in a way. So I think that's amazing, and I think there's great lessons in wisdom and kind of retrospective. Again, this is why we're having the conversation.
Totally.
I think with yourself as well.
But even your problems, I saw something the other day and it said, enjoy your problems. And I'm like, I really like that. I like that, because how many times do we just kind of wallow in our own self-pity and be like, oh, that thing happened, that's crap. But hang on a second. There's got to be a lesson in that. There's got to be a lesson in that.
And imagine where you would be if you did that in real time every time. And look, it's not that we want to look back and say that, but it's like, I often just think like, imagine we looked at our problems as opportunities in every single one of them, and we didn't wallow, like you said, and so on. I often think about that and try to implement it. It's not always going to be that way, but such a great point. So I feel like, everyone I speak to has their own philosophy on business, and they look at business a certain way. And you being in consultancy, I know that you would have that, deep down. So you would kind of have a way that you think about business. If you were starting again and knowing what you know now, how would you go about it? Would you do it the same? Obviously you're a marketer. Do you think about it marketing first? Do you think about it, most products are only going to have minor, different features, so we've got to change it through the communication. Like, how do you think about it, and how would you go about it?
It's kind of a hard question, because I'm trying to not be a stubborn marketer, but I'm still marketing for brand first. I'm still brand first. Someone asked me this question a little while ago, and they're like, brand first, or USP? And I'm like, brand always, because a USP, like a product, product first or brand first? And I'm like, brand always, in any universe, because a product can be replicated. If someone can figure out how to rip off a product, they will. Whereas a brand, again, if it's unique enough, if you get it right, if that thing is different, which it should be, that cannot be replicated. You can't copy it. You can copy a product, but a brand can't. So I would do the same. That I wouldn't change. Moxie actually originally came in, we thought up 3 different brand positionings. There was 3 different types of it, and we landed on this one. This one felt right. It felt right to me personally. It spoke to me the most. But I would still go brand first and think about that brand personality and how is that talking to its audience. So it's those 2 things. Who's it talking to? Who's it for? Who's it talking to? And how is it talking to them?
It's such a great point. It's kind of like the Apple versus Samsung or any of its competitors, really, right? It's like, look, the features are all really, really similar, but Apple talks to you in a way that no other brand in the world has ever talked to you. And I love their advertising. Over the last 20 years, at least once every 2 months, I just pull up Apple ads and I just watch them for creativity. But it talks to what you're saying around brand first. I must say, I think in the modern age when information is not scarce at all, the way you communicate can be the greatest differentiator at all, and the way you build trust and if brand is trust and the way someone interacts with your business. I got to say, I completely agree.
I mean, I just think about ads, and I think about like I also put myself in the shoes of the end consumer, and I think about how I consume ads. And also, again, we see so much information daily, even just like scrolling through your phone. I don't even know how many ads we would see.
Ugh.
And, you know, like I think about like even like a pad, like a period pad. I don't know, an ad that says something like, new whatever pad with anti-leak side channels. Like, okay, great. Like they should all do that. They should all not leak, right?
Yeah. So
I don't
true.
know, whereas Moxie would say something like, you know, welcome to period peace of mind. It's the solution. It's not the product feature, right?
And the relatability as well, right? It's like that relatability piece comes from the communication.
Yeah.
Like how does someone feel when they think about your product?
It's an emotional connection,
Yeah.
rather than something that's necessarily tangible. So I would still say brand first, but then functionally from the business side of things, there's so much I would do differently. Like, all those margin things, I would do so much differently. I would maybe pick a product that didn't have such a long like production supply chain.
What does that mean? So for
like
someone
as in so basically from the time it takes to make it to receiving it is really long. It's a long time. It's too long between when my suppliers make it, when they send it to me, and when I have to pay for it, and then when I get paid for it.
is that something someone should research, like into their product? Is that like
Absolutely.
a research thing, a part of that planning process?
Absolutely,
that you talked about?
exactly. So part of that planning process that I was talking about earlier. So like model that out, figure out when you need to order it, when your supplier expects you to pay for it, when you're going to receive it, when you can sell it, and then when you're going to get paid for it, because you might start to find some gaps.
Wow, that is so helpful.
And you need to think about how you're going to fill those gaps. If you're not going to get money, if you're not going to get paid before you have to pay for the product, how's your business going to survive? Can you patch that hole?
And obviously...
and some can't. That's where people get caught out.
Yeah, and I would imagine that especially if a lot of people that I know always think about running like a clothing business, right? And like often the way you launch a clothing business is like selling different products and not necessarily restocking them in the near term, but trying to create that scarcity and that want for the same customer to buy something different. And so like if you're doing that, what you're talking about then, that kind of that production line of getting from when the ideation to actually selling it, and the time that it takes is often. You kind of mentioned it before, and now it makes sense to me. Is like, so we're launching in 2 months, but we haven't thought about what happens post-launch. So that's where it kind of comes in.
Or people go, we've run out, we should reorder. But then hang on, the product's going to take 3 months to make. So your customer's going to be waiting 3 months. They might not. They might say, I'm just going to go buy another T-shirt.
Yeah, and keeping that attention is absolutely
So
pivotal.
you might say, hang on, I need to order 2 months prior to make sure that when we run out, I'm going to have some stock to sell when we do run out.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah. Wow, so helpful. We're going to dive into the last part, which is Quickfire.
Okay.
So always have to preface this. I don't want you to put any time limit on your answers or anything like that. So
it's
you
meant
can
to be Quickfire.
Yeah, I know, but then the audience is probably sick of me saying this, but it's always like I don't want people to feel like they can't talk, right?
Okay.
So wing it, do whatever you want.
Okay.
One piece of advice for your younger self.
Everything in moderation, but even moderation. Goes back to taking myself too seriously.
Interesting. So everything in moderation, even moderation itself. So take some risks.
No, I think I'm a risk taker, but just don't take myself too seriously.
Okay. How important do you think that is for business owners? Not taking it, because I mean we talked about it, but I think because it I mean look, if you think about the stereotype of a business person,
I just think nothing's ever that bad. Just chill a little, just relax. It's not that serious.
It's kind of what we talked about before, right?
Unless you're saving lives, just relax.
Yeah.
Just like it's okay. Like I just think business owners carry so much. We carry so much weight. We really do. And I know that the risks are a heavy burden. Often a lot of people have put their heart, soul, money, life savings into things. They've got families, and it's huge. It's a really big risk. But again, you know, it's part of that, those early discussions, conversations with yourself and with your family to say, how far am I prepared to go? What is my plan Z? If I risk it all and lose it all, what's my plan? What am I going to do? So I guess only take risks that you're comfortable with, so you can sleep at night.
That's such a good perspective.
What's it all worth? You know, like really, what's it all worth?
Yeah, such a good perspective compared to like the all-in mindset that you hear. And going all in on something's really important, but I think it's more of a.
But you don't want to make yourself.
It's a mental all-in, isn't it? It's not a. Yeah. You know, you got to plan and you got to have those conversations.
Yeah.
So
within
powerful.
your own limits. You know, it's not for everyone, and that's okay too. I just think this whole mentality of like, you know, yeah, push yourself, and if you're not pushing hard enough, then you're not doing good enough. No, everyone's got their own threshold, and that's fine. Just find yours and find what works for you and for your family and your key stakeholders, and set that bar. And when you've reached that bar, then it's time to back out. Also, backing out or stopping or quitting does not mean failure. We need to change how we talk about failure and success as well. That's the whole thing for another day. But I'm really big on that. How we treat, you know, quitting doesn't make you a failure. Don't even like that word.
I do love that, and I think it's
just stop doing what doesn't serve you anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, social media doesn't play a good role in that.
Doesn't help sometimes, does it? Yeah.
Okay, so what advice do you have for future women in business?
Don't be afraid to put yourself first. This is such a generalization, but I just feel like as women, generally, we are nurturers of everything and everyone around us, and often that means looking after ourselves last. So whether that's people who are mothers, carers, etc. Again, you know, doing the consulting and doing some of the work that I do and dealing with, working with a lot of other women, sometimes their own stuff falls by the wayside because they're like, I can't do this because of the kids, or I can't do this because my husband has to do this, or my partner has to do this. And I'm like, yeah, but what about your stuff? This is something you're passionate about, and you're putting it on the back burner because of other people's things. Like, this is something you've wanted to do for ages. How can you make it work for you? Like, why can't people start working around you? Why are you working around everyone else? So, I don't know. I just think society probably needs to also really get better at nurturing that and fostering that for women as well. And I think the workplaces generally are starting to get better. But I would say, you know, stop apologising for wanting to do your thing and putting yourself first.
Yeah, so my follow-up question to that, because I think that's amazing, and this is a really genuine question, is what can men... Because I think it's really important. I really do. Like, you know, I think about my partner in this massively, and what can men do, whether it's you're a husband or whether you're, you know, you're in a position to allow some, or you know, not allow, that's the wrong wording, but it's like, you know, to impact someone on that level. What can men do to, you know, foster the growth of women, or and actually pulling, because for me, I think about it, it's me pulling myself up and saying, hang on, am I being selfish right now? You know, because this is just how it's been, you know, or and so on. And that's the wrong thing. That's wrong. But that's a genuine learning that, you know, I'd love to kind of get your opinion on that.
I think the first thing is awareness, and you just did it and you just said it then. So I think the first thing is awareness and conversation. Having a conversation and talking about it, and just, you know, not assuming anything, and talking to your partner. Definitely. You know, checking in with each other. Like, hey, what's going on? What's up? What are your hopes and dreams? As cheesy as that sounds, but do you know what I mean? Like, checking in with each other. It's a conversation. It's just communication. And, you know, for businesses, from a business perspective, like, I'm just a massive believer in flexi working hours for everyone. Like, I hate when people talk about, like, oh, we offer flexible working hours for working mothers. Stop. Hang on, stop. Like, what about just flexible working hours for everybody? Why is it just the mothers or the women that have flexible working hours? Why? What?
Yeah, because if there's flexible working hours just for women, then there's probably what problem are we trying to fix?
Then we're assuming that it's just the mothers or the women that are doing the school pickups, or
Yeah,
that
that's what I
they're
mean.
the
It's
ones
like
that are
this
staying
end
home.
thought.
Yeah, it's crazy. So it's,
Yeah.
flexible working hours for everyone.
Mm.
It's just, it should be, just generally speaking, paid parental leave. Anyone can be a carer.
Mm.
Anyone can be a nurturer. It's, just stop labelling women as being that and only that.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I'm in a very lucky position where I get to talk to amazing women on a regular basis, and I just think it's so important to have these conversations.
Conversations, it's that.
Mm.
Conversations.
Genuinely.
Mm.
So what advice would you give to someone just starting a business?
Don't sweat the small stuff. Move on. Don't sweat it. Don't be afraid to fail. Fail fast. Move on. I could keep going. Let's stop there.
Why do you think business owners do sweat the small stuff?
I just think we get hung up
how
on...
does that affect them?
I just think we get hung up on failure, and we think that we've failed and we've done something wrong, and we stew on it, and we're like, I think it's a bit of a tall poppy syndrome thing that we have, and we just think that we're not worthy. We're not worthy of success, maybe. Not everyone has this. I have this trait, unfortunately. I tall poppy syndrome myself a lot, where, sometimes it's like I think I'm not good enough. And maybe it's that may have come from being really young in business and being told repeatedly that I was too young and I wasn't good enough and no one was going to buy tampons in tins and what a stupid idea and all the rest of it. And that sort of sunk in. I do feel like we do have a much better sort of culture of entrepreneurship, and we do really foster that. I mean, there's degrees now. You can do that. You can do that as a course now. It's amazing. It didn't exist then. So I think that conversation has changed, but I just think sometimes we beat ourselves up and we're hard on ourselves generally. And I think now, again, with social media and access to just information about everyone and everything, we compare ourselves to other people and what we see as success. And that can be dangerous. I just think, again, marathon, not a sprint. Baby steps. Failure is good. Failure is to me, failure means that you're pushing boundaries. If you're not failing, then to me, it's like you're not challenging the status quo. How are you growing if you're not failing?
I see a massive connection to what you just said then, and also what you were saying before around knowing your boundary and more importantly, knowing what you want. Not painting that there's one kind of picture for success, or there's
what does that even mean?
Exactly. And it's so different for everybody, and clearly identifying that for yourself, and it's very easy to get caught up in what that success is, being very materialistic in the things you have or the position that you need to be in or the size of your business, and instead more just going, okay, what do I actually want out of this? And
what do I want?
Yeah.
Not what do I think others want? What do I want?
That's so powerful. Okay, so last one. What's the most important trait that a founder must have for success, and why?
Resilience. 100%. You're going to get knocked around. Get back up. It's going to be fine. I'm still here, still standing. I got really knocked around. Really knocked around.
It's a great character builder, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Come for me. I've had it all thrown at me. And it just, honestly, it really makes you a stronger person. And, I've got stories to tell.
And it kind of talks to that, if you can, I think you build resilience from being persistent and consistent, right? You mentioned
it's like
before.
a muscle.
Yeah.
Resilience is like a muscle, and you have to build it, and then sometimes you have to flex it. And it'll flex when you least expect it flexing, and you're like, oh my God, I just did that. I just said that. Oh my God.
So true.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I really love that. We're going to wrap it up. I want to say a massive thank you for sharing your journey, being so open as well about the journey and some of the struggles and some of the lessons and so on. Truly an amazing journey. I think, look, 17 years in business is one hell of a ride, and it's one hell of an achievement. So congratulations.
It's a ride for sure.
Yeah, I just
Bumpy,
think, wow,
yeah.
like there's a lot to learn from everything we spoke about today. So super grateful. I know the audience will love it, and our community will absolutely love it as well. So again, a massive thank you.
Thanks so much. It was
Thanks
really
for your
fun.
time. Johnny boy, thanks for putting this together. And again, just to our listeners, wild to think that we're now a top 30 podcast on Spotify for business in Australia consistently. We've had a few really high rises, but it just speaks to the fact that we have an amazing community, and you guys are truly amazing, and all your support, no matter where it is and how you do it, is so appreciated. So thank you so much, and really hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next week.